Anderton is the Senior Planning Manager at Port Everglades. He oversees the implementation of planning, projects, and studies over there. Port Everglades is one of the world's busiest cruise ports and is a leader in cargo shipping in the United States. He began in 2002 at the port, working in the capital improvement program. In 2006, he was promoted to planning manager in the Port Director's Office, in which he oversees activities related to strategic planning, including long and short-range facility planning, economic impact analyses, grant writing, and administration implementation of the Port Everglades Master Vision Plan, which we're going to hear about more tonight. Prior to working at the port, Mr. Anderton has worked in consulting jobs as well as the city of West Palm Beach, and he's had a vast array of experience in transportation and land use planning. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and history from Florida State University, and he's actually an alum of the master's program here at the School of Urban and Regional Planning. Please give me join me in a warm welcome for David Anderton.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to come back to FAU. I haven't actually had an opportunity to speak to students from FAU since I graduated in '98, so it's a pleasure to be back here. When I was asked to do this, I was very pleasantly surprised because, you know, as a practicing planner, dealing really with the specialized field of seaport planning, you don't really hear a lot about seaport planning. I'm an AICP planner. I go to, national conferences, state conferences, etc. Once in a blue moon, you'll see things on aviation planning, but you never see anything on seaport planning. Obviously, there's a lot more airports than there are seaports in the country, but it's a very dynamic type of planning. The port, just like the airport and seaport, it's a big business, and I'll get into some of the numbers related to the business that we do with the port and some of our projections for growth. But we have a lot of different business sectors at Port Everglades. Unlike a lot of ports that are focused on just one or two different business sectors, we really have 4 business sectors at Port Everglades, which is very good from a business perspective. When one business sector is down, the other business sector can pick up the one that's down. So I'll get into a little bit more detail. I was asked tonight to speak about our master plan. So sometimes you hear about, a 3-legged stool. At Port Everglades, 3 boots. And this is how we pride ourselves on our business and how we operate. Let's go back. When we're talking about projects and we're thinking about planning and putting infrastructure in place, we're always thinking about the economy, the environment, and the community. Port Everglades is a huge economic engine, just like the airport is. And you can see some of the economic numbers. This is from our 2009 overall economic impact report that I'm responsible for putting together. We have a very detailed model that's run by a consulting firm that does this for airports and seaports across the country. And you can see, the total jobs that are generated by the facility is over 143,000 jobs, which relates to a personal income of about $5.4 billion. And the total value of the economic activity that's generated by the port is about $14 billion, which results in more or less $400 billion in state and local taxes. Those direct jobs that you see there, those are the actual jobs that are in the facility itself. Stevedores, people that are working for the shipping lines and the container yards, the cruise industry, etc. And typically those are very high-paying jobs. You don't necessarily need a college degree to have these types of jobs. And the average wage, specifically in the container sector, is around $43,000 as a starting salary. So that's actually higher than the average salary in Broward County. So these are very high-paying jobs where you don't necessarily need a college degree to have this type of job. Again, asked to speak about the master plan. When I started back at the port in 2002, it was just after 9/11. And the port had been developing a master plan that was basically almost complete, and then 9/11 happened, and that plan was never adopted. Since that time, we've gone back after 9/11 because it really changed the way ports do business from a security perspective. We developed a plan in 2005, 2006 that was finally adopted by the board in 2007. There were a couple areas that our board was concerned about, and those had to do with the turning notch, which is really the linchpin of our master plan in terms of containerized cargo growth, and also berth 29, where we wanted to expand a berth in Southport, and I'll put up an aerial in a little bit and kind of explain the port in its different areas. So again, when we took that plan to the board in 2007, they directed us to update that every 2 years. Well, it's very fortunate that they directed us to do that, because obviously you all know the economic recession that we've had, and it really affected a lot of our projected forecasts for our business sector. So the timing of that was lucky, if you will. I mean, it's unfortunate obviously with the recession, that downturn in the world and global economy. But from a planning perspective, it afforded us the opportunity to go back and reevaluate a lot of our projections, and therefore, kind of re-timeline, if you will, a lot of the projects that were in the original 20-year plan. So this update actually just concluded. It was just adopted by our board on March 1st. We started the process in 2009, and it was done in a couple phases. This kind of outlines the elements of the plan. Phase 1 was completed in 2009. As we just said, phase 2, the actual completion of the plan, was actually adopted by the board in 2011. It really, it's a pretty standard, planning model. We're looking at facility assessment. You're doing an assessment of the current facility. You're doing your market assessments. You're doing forecasts for your different business sectors. You're looking at the needs and throughput enhancement. The bars up here with regards to your projections, your different business sectors. What type of infrastructure do I need to construct at the facility in order to accommodate those projections? We get into strategy development, where we're actually developing the plan themselves. We start off with a 20-year plan. We set the bar rather high with the vision. It's really a vision plan. And then we work our way backwards from the 20-year plan to the 10-year plan to the actual 5-year master plan. And the 5-year master plan is actually what we utilize to feed projects into our 5-year capital improvement program. Phase 2, again, a little bit more strategy development, the final plan, and then we spend a lot of time on implementation plan. A lot of master plans, there's a lot of, typically you'll see a lot of grandiose things. A lot of times you'll find that there wasn't a lot of thought put into how am I actually going to implement this plan, and not only how am I going to implement it, but how am I going to pay for it. And that's something that, at Port Everglades, we really pride ourselves on, at least from a planning standpoint, is that the plan itself, we actually get into the financing and how we're going to be able to finance these projects. Phase 3, which we're getting ready to start, we're going to be starting in April, is actually incorporating this document into the county's comprehensive plan. I don't know if a lot of you are familiar with comprehensive planning. I would think that most of you are. It's a very large document with different elements that the county has. The deep water port component actually fits into the coastal management element of the plan, and it's a component of that element. There's legislation that's currently out there in the legislature that may change, comprehensive planning. I don't know how familiar you all are with that, but the new governor has proposed some pretty dramatic changes to the Department of Community Affairs and the top-down planning process that we have in the state, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. We had significant public outreach during the process, over 15 stakeholder meetings. Several were held at the port. We had one at the library, actually right across the street from here. We were able to gain a lot of input from the environmental community and garner actually a lot of support from the environmental community on that one project that I told you about, which was the turning notch. And I'll get into a little bit about that as we move on. Okay, so here's the facility. The port is about 2,200 acres. We at Port Everglades are what's called a landlord port. There are two types of ports. There's landlord ports and there's operating ports. In Port Everglades, we're a landlord port. Of that 2,200 acres, Broward County's Port Everglades owns about 1,450 acres. And being a landlord port, we lease out land to tenants who operate port business on that land. And that's part of how we make our revenue. On the other side, operating ports, just for your information, that's exactly what they do. They own the land and they actually operate it. So they're hiring employees that work for the port, probably an authority in this case, and they actually are the ones who are doing the stevedoring and controlling the cranes and doing those types of activities within the port. really divided into 3 areas. Southport. Southport is where we do the majority of our containerized cargo operations. I mentioned the Southport turning notch project, and I'll get into some more detailed graphics of that. This is the existing turning notch today. This turning notch is actually surrounded by a conservation easement. This conservation easement has about a little over 45 acres of mangroves in it. And in order to allow for expansion of that turning notch, we had to do some pretty significant negotiations with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and also working with environmental stakeholders to actually get the department to agree to release a portion of that conservation easement, which was a huge hurdle for the port. We've been working on that for over 5 years, and it's only the second time in the history of the state of Florida that the department's actually released a portion of a conservation easement. So that was a significant step forward for us in being able to accommodate the future growth we're projecting. Port Everglades has great access. The synergy between the airport and the seaport is pretty significant. Probably about 60% of our multi-day cruise passengers fly into Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport and then take taxis, cabs, buses, etc. to get over to the facility to take their cruises. Great access into the port. I-595 actually ends at the front entrance of Eller Drive. So as my director likes to say when he's out doing his public speaking engagements, there's really no stoplights between Port Everglades and the west coast of the United States. You're on the highway and you can be on the highway all the way to California. We also have great rail connections. The FEC line is actually right here, and FEC actually operates an intermodal container facility over in this area. You can't quite see it on the map. It's up a little bit further here, but it's over in this area here. We actually have a spur that runs down Old Eller Drive on the north side, and we have plans in our master plan in cooperation with the Florida Department of Transportation to actually extend that spur to Southport so we can start running intermodal cargo out of the port via train, taking rubber off the roads, and that's got some pretty significant environmental benefits. This is Midport. This is where the majority of our multi-day cruise operations take place, in this area here. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard about the Oasis of the Seas, Royal Caribbean, and her sister ship, the Allure of the Seas, that are now sailing out of Port Everglades. Those are the largest cruise ships in the world. They're about 220,000 gross tons, 1,150 feet in length, and they hold about 6,000 passengers. Just to kind of put that in perspective, the largest cruise ship before that was about 35 to 4,000 passengers. So these ships are enormous, carry an enormous amount of passengers. And as part of the master plan that was adopted in 2007, one of the projects in there was to construct the terminal to be able to accommodate those vessels, and we were able to do that actually under budget and in less time than we anticipated to do it, which is saying a lot for really a public agency, if you will, because Broward County is not known for a very quick procurement process. The other part of the port is Northport. One thing that I did forget to mention about Midport is that back in this area here, you see a lot of the petroleum tank farms. This is actually privately owned land. This is part of the 2,200 acres that we do not own. All the big oil companies are back here, and we also have a little bit of that in Northport. Also in Northport, we have the convention center, and we also do some of our multi-day and daily cruise operations in Northport at these 2 facilities here. Daily cruise activity is significantly declined over the last 8 years or so. A lot of that has to do with landside gambling. There's not, people can go to Hard Rock Casino now and gamble. They don't need to go out on a vessel to do it. So we've seen, and actually as part of our projections in the 07 plan, we projected that was actually going to decline, and we've seen that happen. So, the 20-year market forecast. The market forecast drives the plan. It does, like I said earlier. You got to understand your business lines. You got to understand what your projections are going to be, and able to try to plan infrastructure that would be necessary to support that business. You can see that this graphic shows what the 2006 plan was projecting in terms of containers. Now, a TEU is how we at the port measure volume. A TEU is called a 20-foot equivalency unit. That's how containerized cargo is measured. When you see a semi on the road, that's actually 2 TEUs, because that semi is about 41, 42 feet. So that would be 2 20-foot equivalency units. The 2006 plan had a projection to 2.7 over the 20-year, 2.7 billion over the 20-year period, which would have taken us to 2026. The revised projection, given the downturn in the economy, we're down to 2.4, which is still very robust through 2029. And the percentage represents the difference between the two projections. And then on the bottom, you can see what our actual numbers were in 2010. What's interesting is that before the downturn in the economy in about 2006, we were actually at almost 1 million TEUs. So we've seen a pretty significant decline with the downturn in the economy. But I do have, it's a pleasure to say that actually business has been picking up over the last 6 months. We've actually seen double-digit containerized growth over the last 6 months again. So it appears that at least from a global perspective and from a trade perspective, the economy's definitely starting to pick up a little bit. Dry bulk, neo-bulk, this is product that is cement, dry product. It can be rebar, it can be sheets of steel. That's what we call dry and neo-bulk. Our projection in 2006 was 8 million. It's come down a little bit in 2009 to 7.6 million. And this 7.6 million also includes about 4 million tons of aggregate, which is a new service that we are calling for in the 20-year planning horizon. I'll get into a little bit of that later as well. Petroleum has been pretty stable, even with the downturn in the economy. We really see, modest growth in the petroleum industry. What's interesting about Port Everglades, you may or may not know, it's not a refining port. All the product that comes into Port Everglades is refined product. The majority of that product comes into the port from the Gulf Coast. We do get a little bit of product from Europe, and again, the majority of it is under the Jones Act, which is an act for shipping that requires American vessels being used to move product from American ports to American ports. So the majority of the petroleum product that we do receive comes from the Gulf Coast. Again, pretty flat growth there. We supply all of the gasoline to the 14 counties in South Florida. We supply all the jet and aviation fuel to Miami International Airport and Fort Lauderdale International Airport. That fuel is provided via pipeline. We have direct pipelines that go to Fort Lauderdale and to Miami International Airport. We also provide all the jet and aviation fuel to Palm Beach, and that's actually trucked. Cruise is where we've seen the most robust growth. As I mentioned, the Oasis and Allure of the Seas. We just signed a 10-year contract with Royal Caribbean that's going to guarantee about 4 million cruise passengers over a 20-year period with them. We also just executed an agreement with Carnival Cruise Lines, which will increase our capacity even further. As part of that agreement, we're upgrading 4 terminals for them, and those are actually in design right now. Okay, containerized cargo. This is the evolution of containerized cargo. And what's interesting is the 6th-generation ship that you see on the end is now nowhere near the largest ones that are on the order books of the large shipping lines. Actually, Maersk, Sealand, and MSC just ordered combined, I want to say, 10 vessels that are over 14,000 TEUs, which is enormous. And at Port Everglades, because a lot of this has to do with our current depth that we have at the port, and I'll get into a little bit of that later as well, that's the size vessel that's currently calling at Port Everglades, and again, that's because of our depth. Port Everglades' outer entrance channel is at 46 feet of depth, and in the inner entrance channel and in the access channels that get the vessels to the actual berths, we're at 42 feet. So the reason why the outer entrance channel is deeper is because when these vessels are coming in, they've got to come in under power because of currents, and there's a squat that happens on the vessel when they're under power, so they're actually coming in a little bit deeper than they would if they weren't under power. 5th generation, these are calling it PEB today, and you notice how it says lightly loaded. That's an inefficiency. These vessels do come into the port, but before they get to Port Everglades, they actually have to stop over at Freeport, and they have to unload and reposition some of their containers so they're able to get into Port Everglades because of the depth issue that we have. That's an inefficiency, and that's something that is being studied right now by the Army Corps of Engineers. We've had a study actually that's been going on for almost 14 years. The Army, you think Broward County's slow, the Army Corps of Engineers is a lot slower than Broward County. they've had a feasibility study that's been underway for 14 years for Port Everglades. Savannah, who is very near, the Port of Savannah is very near the completion of their study, is just a little bit actually behind us. They're going on their 15th year. So after the port would be dredged deeper, these are the type of vessels that would be able to come into the port. These are post-Panamax vessels. And you can see the Panama Canal right here, and I'm sure probably some of you are aware of what's going on with the Panama Canal. They're currently in the process of widening the locks of the Panama Canal in order to allow these larger vessels to traverse the canal, which really is going to be a benefit for the East Coast in terms of containerized cargo, because you'll no longer have to land bridge cargo from the West Coast. Most of the Asian cargo comes in on the West Coast. It goes to LA Long Beach, and then it's land bridged via train, usually to the Midwest, and then it goes out from there to trucks to supply the United States with Asian cargo. With the widening of the canal, the shipping lines are then going to be able to provide all water service from Asia to the East Coast, which cuts down the amount of time that it takes to get product to market, and it also saves costs to the end user, which is you and I when we're buying things at Home Depot, or we're buying things, large, big screen TVs at Brandmore or whatever. Okay, in the plan, these are really the infrastructure needs, or the main infrastructure needs that were identified. And it's the ability to berth these fully laden post-Panamax vessels. The vessel that we're looking at Port Everglades is nowhere near the size that I was talking about earlier, that these larger shipping lines are talking about constructing. We're looking at vessels in the range of about 7,000 TEUs. And the reason is that even at 50 feet, Port Everglades probably wouldn't be able to handle one of these 14,000 TEU vessels. And even furthermore, 14,000 TEU vessel isn't going to be able to get through the widened Panama Canal. So what you're going to see is you're going to see those larger vessels still doing all water service from Asia to the West Coast. You'll see 10,000, maybe 11,000 TEU vessels traversing the canal, and then what's going to happen is they're going to stop at a port probably in Kingston, could be Freeport, and you're going to have feeder vessels that will take cargo from those larger vessels and then feed into the East Coast ports. And that's all, again, tied to the depth issues associated with the East Coast ports. This is just a list of some of the projects that came out of the 06 plan. A lot of these projects have been implemented, and that's something that's very fulfilling for me as a planner. Not only do I get to, plan these projects and figure out how we're going to pay for them, but I actually get to work with my engineering division and see them actually getting constructed and being built, and that's very fulfilling from a planning perspective. I'm not going to run through the list. A lot of these projects are completed or underway. Let's see if there's any particular ones that I want to point out. I think I have some exhibits that follow this, so we'll just kind of go through those. I think we're kind of highlighting the bigger ones. This is a bridge that was constructed. This is a plan. This is a project that came out of the 06 plan that actually connects our cargo area in Midport here to Southport. And what this does is it alleviates the need for cargo to go inside and outside of the security zone twice. Security, again, is changed at the port. We have checkpoints at the port. So this allows the free flow of cargo from Midport into Southport and back and forth that way. That project's completed. I think the cost of that project was around $11 million. Southport Container Yard, we're adding capacity in Southport. This project's actually almost complete. We're adding, it's about 45 acres of additional container yard capacity in Southport, and that's really once the containers are offloaded off the vessel, they go to the container yard. They either sit in the yard for a day or two, or they're immediately taken out, maybe sometimes drayed over to the Andrews Avenue FEC facility and shipped somewhere else up the state or out of the state, or most of the time they're put onto trucks and they're taken to the end user, or they may be taken to a warehouse where they're unpacked and then repacked and eventually end up to the end user. This is a project that came out of the 2006 plan and is currently in design. McIntosh Road is the main road that leads into our Southport containerized terminal area. That road has some capacity issues. This project is going to increase the capacity of that road significantly, and is going to promote right turn lanes into the container yards. Currently, that road is 2 lanes in each direction, split by a median, and in that median there's curb cuts. So a lot of times we're getting large trucks that are making left turns, and we have a lot of traffic issues down there. This project also creates staging for the different yards, because currently we have some staging issues down there, so this increases the capacity of the roadway to allow sufficient staging for each of the container yards, so there isn't a traffic situation in Southport. That project actually will start construction. It's about 80% design complete right now, and I think we're looking at starting construction in probably early 2012. This is the bypass road project. This is a project that came out of the 2006 plan, and we've carried it forward into the 2009 plan. In the 2006 plan, it was really a concept. We've actually started the hard design of that project now. We've gone through programming. Phase 1 is actually at about 65% design complete right now. We've taken the project and broken it into phases now. This project has a significant capital cost. It was broken into phases partly because of that. But as we mentioned earlier, 9/11 kind of changed things. Where currently there's a checkpoint that's been placed in this position here. This is the convention center over here. And that checkpoint is actually back here. So you actually have to pass through a checkpoint to get into the convention center. What the phase 1 of this project does, it actually takes that checkpoint, moves that checkpoint all the way back here, so then you have free flow access in and out of the convention center. In order to do that, there are some security concerns, and there are some things from a security perspective that we need to do, and those are included in the project cost. We've got to do some hardening in one of our parking garage, and also some of our cruise terminals that are up in Northport. This is the second phase of the project, and what the second phase of the project does, before 9/11, you used to have free flow access along this roadway to get from US 1 to 17th Street and back. And as a resident here, I've lived here since 1980. I used to cut through the port all the time to get to the beach. It was a very easy way to get to the beach and avoid a lot of traffic that would happen on 17th Street and US 1. Fortunately, 9/11 changed that. What we're trying to do with this project, the second phase of the project, is put it back to a pre-9/11 condition. This project, total cost, is about $36 million. So I'm going to talk quickly about some of the strategic changes that we looked at from the 2006 plan that we've carried forward and now have been adopted in the 2009 plan. As I talked about earlier, the Southport turning notch, we had an idea or a concept for mitigation in 2006 that we took to our board. Our board did not like that idea, so we went back to the drawing board, worked with the environmental community, worked with the state, and were able to come up with a concept that DEP finally approved. The turning notch project in the 2006 document was a 2-phase project. We're now looking to implement that in 1 phase. The Army Corps of Engineers Deepening the Widening Program has seen significant progress since 2006, and actually that document is going to be available for public release at the end of 2011, early 2012 in draft format. As I mentioned earlier, we're very close to the airport, so there are considerations that we have to take into account for the airport. Flight surfaces being the big one. There are certain flight surfaces that we have to look at when we're planning the facilities. That affects the height of vessels, that affects the height of the cranes. You need taller cranes to get to access larger vessels, and those are things that we've been working with the aviation department on for about 3 years, and we've really refined and honed in on that. But in the 2006 plan, a lot of our bulkheads are aged. The port's been there for a long time. A lot of our bulkheads are older than 25, 30 years old. In the 2006 plan, basically we had an engineering study that said you're going to need to replace all your bulkheads within the next 20 years. Well, we went back, we did a little bit further study on that. It's fine for them to say we need to replace them all in 20 years, but which ones do I need to replace when? And I need a phasing plan to better understand which ones are deteriorating faster than others. Are there measures that we can take to prolong the life of some of those bulkheads, like sacrificial handling systems, which is really an electric current that's run through the bulkhead. Bulkhead's really sheet pile, it's metal, and it's in salt water, so it rusts. So there are protective measures that you do, like sacrificial handling and cathodic protection to prolong the life of those bulkheads. One of the other things is, there's been a lot of talk for many years, and it's kind of gathered some steam over the last couple of years about the opening up of Cuba. We see an opportunity to run a ferry service from Port Everglades to Cuba, and we've made accommodations within the plan to accommodate a ferry operation. And in the 2006-2007 plan, We proposed a crushed rock facility. I talked a little bit about that earlier, and the projections to be within the 5-year plan. With the downturn in the economy, the slowdown in the construction industry, there's not so much of a demand for that now. We also had an intermodal container transfer facility that was part of that plan, and we have now moved that project up into the 5-year plan, and that jives very well with the Yellow Drive Overpass project that's finally been funded and is moving forward to construction, which is due to start in actually in the summer of this year. Excuse me. So what this graphic is going to show you is really some of those changes that I talked about. It's just going to show it to you graphically. The top represents the plan in 2006. The bottom represents the plan in 2011. And as I go through it, we talked about the aggregate facility was in the 5-year plan. It's been pushed back to the 10-year plan. This is the turning notch project. The expansion of the notch was in the 10-year plan. It's now moved forward to the 5-year plan, and it's going to happen as 1 phase versus 2 phases. The Upland Enhancement Project, and I'll get into more of that. I've got some more detailed slides on that. Again, we were proposing mitigation up in Deerfield, on Deerfield Island. We're now going to be doing mitigation on port, where we're going to be constructing 16.5 acres of mangroves adjacent to the remaining portion of the conservation easement. Got into a little bit about the bulkheads. As I said, it was very rough cut look in terms of what needed to replace when. Now we've got a better understanding of, like I said, which ones can be prolonged and which ones need to be replaced when. And the first one that's going to be replaced is at berth 9 and 10. And when we replace that bulkhead, we're actually going to replace it in a configuration that will allow us to have safer turning movements of moving vessels in and out of the notch. You can see that it's actually going to be located a little bit further. So the plan for these slips up here, as we're replacing bulkheads, we're going to replace them in locations that give us efficiencies from a business standpoint, but also from a safety standpoint. So what you'll see is that these slips actually get a lot wider over the 20-year period. This is another one where we're going to be lengthening slip 2. We've got a cruise terminal right here, which is terminal 4. As I said, cruise ships are getting bigger as well, so we want to lengthen that slip. You can see it down here, how it's been notched out in order to accommodate, a roughly 10,000 to 50-foot long vessel. Talked about the bypass road was in one phase. Now it's being proposed in 2 phases. Okay, computer is trying to catch up. Okay, this is the 10-year plan. Again, the ICTF. It's been moved forward to the 5-year plan. The aggregate project comes into play in the 10-year plan, and you can see this is the ICTF, what you see in red. This is the rail spur I was talking about. This is the Yellow Drive Overpass project. DOT is actually going to be constructing some bridge structures that will allow us to bring the rail underneath the elevated portion of Yellow Drive. And then this portion here is the intermodal facility, and then this portion on this side is actually the aggregate facility where you'd be moving crushed rock aggregate out of the port via rail. Berth 29 was extended to increase berth capacity. That had some environmental impacts. Our board told us to go back and take a further look at that, and we've actually removed that from the plan. By removing that from the plan, since we were going to have a longer berth there, we were going to be able to accommodate more containerized cargo. We were going to fill in the Tracor Basin, which is this basin right here, but since we're not going to be utilizing that as much for containerized cargo, now there's no need to fill in the Tracor Basin to create additional land area to handle additional capacity. Got a multimodal facility, which is really like a centralized processing facility for cruise passengers. That was being projected to be built in 1 phase. We're now proposing to construct that in 2 phases. You can see how the slip 1 was even in 2006 was getting significantly wider and was being lengthened again to the west. We scaled that project back, but we're only going to lengthen the one side, which is the cruise side. And there's the ferry. With the extension of the notch, we're able to fit a small ferry in this area here of the expanded terminal. New bulkheads, slip 3 into the 20-year plan. In the 20-year plan, and this was part of what the Army Corps of Engineers was looking at, but as the studies progressed and they refined it, that portion's actually dropped out of their plan. They were actually looking at deepening the Dania Cutoff Canal from its current depth of about 18 feet to 32 feet, which would allow for ro-ro vessels. Ro-ro is not, I mean, there's a lot of acronyms that you're probably not familiar with. Ro-ro is called roll-on, roll-off cargo. That's where a vessel's hull basically opens up at the back and you're able to drive chassis on and off versus using low-low, which is load-on, load-off, where you're actually using landside cranes to pick containers off the vessels and put them landside. So that Dania Cutoff Canal portion is now fallen off of the plan, and we were able to move the ro-ro vessels further back into the extended turning notch. And what's interesting is that over the last couple years, the industry's actually seen a decline in the amount of ro-ro vessels. Most of the containerized cargo operators are moving to more of the low-low, load-off, containerized gantry trains. So we've actually seen a decline in the ro-ro operations. So we don't need as many of those types of parts. Again, you know, in the original plan, we had just identified that the majority of the bulkheads were going to need to be replaced. Now we have a phasing plan of how those are going to be replaced. You saw some of them in the 5-year, you saw some of them in the 10-year, and now you're seeing the rest in the 20-year time frame. And then the second phase of the multimodal center comes into play there. I pushed it twice, so let's see if this thing's going to catch up. All right, I think we should be okay. All right, I talked a little bit about the mangrove creation enhancement project in order to expand the notch. Southport turning notch, again, this whole area that you see here is a conservation easement. In order to expand that turning notch, we need to remove approximately 8.7 acres of that conservation easement and mangrove area. That's going to be replaced with 16.5 acres at these locations here. I don't know the exact acreage on each side, but both of these sides total about 16.5 acres. So there's the 8.68, there's the 16.5. Then what happens is we create the mangrove creation project area, the agreement that we have with DEP that's been executed, it's a legally binding agreement. There are some criteria in that agreement where we have to meet what's called trending towards success. Really what that means is there's a bunch of criteria associated with the mangrove plantings that they need to meet this criteria in order for the DEP to release the conservation easement. That review will occur 1 year after the planting of those mangroves. Once we meet that criteria, then what Broward County is going to do is they're going to, because we currently own the land underneath the conservation easement area, although it's an easement, we own the property. We're going to give that property to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So we're going to fee simple transfer that property to them. It will then be under their ownership. So this is the turning notch project. Again, I talked about in 2006, it was going to be in 2 phases. We're going to go from 900 to 1450, and then from 1450 to 2450. In the current plan, it proposes to take it in one phase from 900 feet to 2400 feet. We did pretty significant economic impact analysis and financial analysis on this project, and these are just some of the numbers. So in order to break down the numbers for our board, the numbers that you see up here today, these are just Broward County numbers. The numbers are much more significant than just Broward County. There are other counties, other regions that are going to be impacted by this project, but we've just broken it down and presented it in terms of the Broward County economic impact. What this project does is it really creates a minimum of 4 additional berths in Southport. And one of the big drivers that came out of this plan and the plan previously was that we're berth efficient from a cargo perspective. So this will allow for 4 additional berths to be constructed in Southport. And you can see, I'm not going to go over the numbers, but you can see the economic impact that would have. This is just a little analysis of the cost, the project cost, and that cost that you see there includes the mangrove creation project. And it doesn't stop there from a mitigation standpoint. Once Once we create the 16.5 acres of mangroves, and then we proceed to go ahead and remove the existing mangroves, the 8.6 acres of mangroves, we then have to mitigate those mangroves in Westlake Park. So that cost is also reflected in here, and that's to the tune of roughly about $14 million. So it's really, it's really a 2-for-1 hit from a mitigation standpoint. We're building 16.5 acres of mangroves, and then we're also going to be doing some enhancements to Westlake Park in order to offset the impact of actually removing those 8.7 acres of mangroves. The current schedule has operations starting in 2017 with full operation in 2024, and additional gross revenue of full use is approximately $37.72 million, and all of this is tied back to our market projections. So the financial analysis is all tied back to incremental growth that's proposed in the cargo sector based on the market projections, and that's how we're able to come up to a number in terms of additional gross revenue for the board. Okay, this is the Army Corps of Engineers program back in 2006, and as I said, that study's progressed over the last couple of years. You can see this is what was being proposed at that time, and you can see, like I said, currently we're about 46 feet out here, and they're proposing 54 feet plus 1 plus 1. I'll get into the details of that. Really, when the Army Corps of Engineers approves projects, they allow for what's called 1 foot of overdredge. That's the 1 foot there, and then they also allow for 1 foot of advanced maintenance, because you're always doing maintenance dredging. Once you dredge, there's always silt and sand to fill it back in, and every so often you have to go back in and dredge it out to its approved depth. So the old program was roughly 56 feet, then it went to 49 feet in the inner entrance channel and the turning basin, and roughly 49 to 51 feet. And you can see here at the time they were still looking at the 32 feet down on the Daniel cutoff canal. This is the current program today, and this is the current draft economic development plan that's going to be put forward in the report that will be out that I mentioned earlier. They're looking at 57 feet in the outer entrance channel, and then 50 feet for the remainder of the project. And it stops here. It does not go all the way down to the Daniel cutoff canal. I talked a little bit about the turning notch project. One of the big things in this plan is that we were able to decouple the turning notch project from the Army Corps of Engineers project. Back in '06, those two projects were combined. And we made a strategic decision at Port Everglades to separate those two projects because funding for federal dredging projects is not an easy thing to do. It's one thing to get the study approved, it's another thing to go through the appropriation process, but then it's a whole other thing to actually get funding for the project. And given the current state of the economy and the administration's position on earmarks, because typically that's how dredging projects get funded, is through earmarks, it doesn't look very good in terms of dredging projects getting funded from the federal government. So that's why we made the decision to actually separate the projects. The bottom line is that we're going to see additional growth in Port Everglades. We hope that one day we do get to 50 feet, and I'm confident that we will. It may be not in the time frame that we hope. We'll get there eventually, but it's very important that we build additional berths to handle additional capacity, because the cargo is still going to come here. It just may come on smaller vessels or vessels that aren't fully loaded. I talked about the turning notch extension project in pretty good detail there. We extend that out. The actual core program, if and when it moves forward, they would actually come in and deepen a portion of that turning notch to 50 feet. It's currently at 42 feet, so we're going to be doing that expansion at the existing depth of 42 feet. Then the Corps would come in and they would deepen a portion of it to 50 feet to allow us to fit a post-Panamax vessel in there. We did a little bit of analysis on the deepening and widening program too. These numbers, the 2-to-1 cost-benefit ratio is a number that's been produced by the Corps. We actually took the incremental growth that would be shown minus the turning notch. You got a certain amount of growth that's going to occur with the turning notch expansion of the existing depth. Then we took the additional cargo that we would see the benefit from being at 50 feet, and that's how we were able to come up with the financial analysis and the economic impact analysis for the deepening and widening program from a Broward County perspective. Again, expensive project, $255 million. The federal share is about 155 million, the port share is about 100 million, and then there are a lot of other costs that can potentially arise, and those are estimated at about 23 million, and those additional costs would be to the port. Again, this is the current schedule for the program, and this, this is what the Corps gives you, and this is if all the stars and the moon align. They told us when we started the study, 14 years ago, it was going to take, 3 to 4 years to complete. Well, 15 years later. So, as I said, it's going to be released for public comment in December 2011. They're hoping to start design in 2012, complete design in 2014, and they're hoping to start construction in 2015 and be completed in 2017. But again, there's a lot of things that need to happen in order for that schedule to stay true. What happens if we don't extend the turning notch? And there is no deepening. That was something that we looked at as well. And you can see the numbers here. We wouldn't be able to meet the market forecast of 1.9 million TEUs in 2020 because we wouldn't have the berths to be able to accommodate the growth. Wouldn't be able to achieve the 2.4 million TEU projection in 2029. We wouldn't have the capacity to handle that additional cargo. That incremental growth of the turning notch itself is about 930,000 TEUs, which is pretty significant. That's more than what we're handling today. Just that increment. You have the potential loss of existing customers if you don't deepen the port. The Port of Miami was just recently approved. They've actually been approved. Their project was approved a couple of years ago. The governor just made an executive decision, I think it was last week or a week or two ago. They're actually going to fund that project through the state to allow the Port of Miami to get there. And that's the lost opportunity. It's kind of a rehash of the economic benefits that I talked about before, the loss of the jobs, the taxes, and the economic activity. This is a complicated graphic. I talked a little bit about how we have to coordinate with the airport. This is a composite of several different flight services, probably like 6 different flight services that airline pilots have and the Aviation Department Airport have to deal with that are governed by FAA. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but basically we'll be able to expand the turning notch and have the cranes that we need to be able to handle the larger vessels. It's just taking some coordination with the Aviation Department and FAA. Talked a little bit already about the bulkhead replacement, the schedule summary. This kind of outlines which bulkheads are going to be replaced when. Project decision matrix. This is something that when we move projects into the 5-year plan, we put together a matrix that looks at a lot of different things to give the executives, myself, our director, an idea of whether this is a go or a no-go project. And these are some of the sensitivities that are looked at. Obviously project cost, what's your incremental return on investment, what's your net present value, or the economic impact, the environmental impact, and what's the customer regulatory need. This is just some of the 5 key projects that are in the 2009 plan where we took that matrix and we completed it to allow us to make a decision on whether or not to move forward on these projects. I'm not going to get into detail about the 10 and 20-year visions plans, but this is really the 5-year plan. And you can see that the 5-year plan has projects that were in the previous plan that were previously funded. Those are ones that are identified in green. And then we have the other projects that are in the 5-year plan. And you can see, marine infrastructure is not cheap. It's very expensive. Just the master plan projects over the 5-year period are $500 million. That's not our entire capital improvement program. Our capital improvement program has significant maintenance and things like that in it as well. So typically our 5-year CIP is to the tune of about $500 million, $500 to $600 million for a 5-year period. These are just the master plan projects. Okay, so I talked about a little bit about how do you pay for it. Well, we did pretty significant financial analysis looking at our revenues, our expenses, tying that back to our projections, factoring in, tariff increases because that's how the port makes revenue. There's a tariff, so we charge customers. We charge customers for tying up the berth. We charge them for the amount of time they're at the berth. We charge them for using our cranes. We We charge them for every TEU that they unload. We charge them for every passenger that comes across the dock. We charge them for every barrel of oil or petroleum product that's discharged. That's how we make our revenue. You can see in 2011, projected revenue is $131 million. It's a big business. But again, we tied everything back to the revenue projections, and understanding that with the significant capital costs of these projects, we're going to have to do some bonding. The port did a bond about it was a little bit less than a year ago, but we also understand that we need to understand our bonding capacity, make sure that we have enough debt service coverage ratio to be able to issue bonds when we need to in order to build the capital infrastructure to support the business. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but really what this one looks at, this analysis looks at all of the projects and also looks at the cost of the deepening and widening program for the Army Corps of Engineers. And the important thing here is that, again, I talked about debt coverage, and there are certain tests that you have to use in order to make sure that you've got enough coverage to cover your debt as you're issuing your bonds. And although the numbers that you see that are highlighted in yellow, they still meet the test, your margins are starting to get pretty close there. And that's one of the things that we felt was important to look at in terms of you're adding $100 million cost from the port's perspective, perhaps even $130 million, and you start to see that your coverage ratios are starting to get a little thin there. So this one looks at really is the same type of analysis, except we've taken out the 100 plus million for the Army Corps deepening and widening program, and you can see that those three numbers now are significantly higher in terms of coverage. I think before we were like at 1.4, 1.3. These numbers are now 1.85, 1.84, 1.79. So you're in much better shape this way in terms of your debt coverage. My director, Phil Allen, he was the CFO of Broward County for 25 years before he was port director. So he places a huge emphasis on the financial analysis. And as I said earlier, a lot of plans don't really go into a lot of detail about how you're actually going to pay for projects. We were able to show through these analyses that we can certainly pay for the projects that we've outlined within the 5-year and the 10-year. This is just a cost comparison, the 06 plan and the 09 plan. You can see in 06 we were at almost $2 billion. That cost has come down now to about 1.4. We've found some efficiencies. We have actually all of the bulkheads didn't need to be replaced that were said needed to be replaced within that 20-year period. We were able to extend the life of some of those bulkheads. The bulkheads alone are a $500 million project. So the cost has come down significantly. So what are the next steps? Well, as I said before, the next step really going to be to incorporate that plan into the comprehensive plan. And with that, I think that's it for me. I'll be happy to answer some questions. Or maybe, actually, Arlene Davis of my staff, she'll answer the questions.
So I have a question. This last slide is this financial sort of thing.
Yes.
You feel much more comfortable sort of financially not deepening the port. Is that true?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
However,
the margins are close.
Right. It's easier to do. You feel more comfortable in a risk situation. But if you don't deepen the port, then you lose all of the economic impact.
That's correct. Not
So-
all of it, but you lose an incremental portion of it.
You lose most of it.
You lose an incremental portion. I can
Big
get
increment.
well, like it's actually, let's see, 930. It's like about it's about in between 500 and 700,000 TEUs, which is significant. And that's why the port's made the decision, and the county's made the decision to continue on with the study. The study's fully funded. We're going to continue with the study. It's going to get approved, and we're going to keep our fingers crossed that Congress one day is going to appropriate the money for the project. But what's interesting is the Port of Miami project. You saw our benefit cost ratio. The Port of Miami's benefit cost ratio is a little bit over 1. Our benefit cost ratio is 2 to 1. So it's significantly higher than the Port of Miami.
David, first I want to congratulate you on a very nice presentation. I think it's important for students to see the complexity and the importance of the economic analysis, which is not the sexy stuff, but that's really very important.
But it's very important.
It doesn't happen unless that economics works. But my questions really have to do with the relationship of this port development, this vision plan, to the larger picture of what's going on around the port. Your presentation largely is dedicated to the port and the complexity of making this whole thing work. But the port doesn't operate in a vacuum.
That's correct.
To which there's a couple of questions I need to ask you. One is the Eller Overpass, which is a wonderful project which will in fact improve access into the port, because while you say the port has great access, it really has great location. Access leaves something to be desired, in my opinion, because of the Spangler Road issue and the 17th Street issues, which we can get to another point. But specifically, you say that one of the reasons you do the overpass is so that you can get the train underneath the overpass, and that accomplishes your multimodal situation.
Sure.
Where do those trains go? Are they going to be using the FEC rail line?
Yes.
Well, how does that mesh with the FEC rail proposal to turn it into a commuter line?
Well, that's not an FEC proposal, that's a DOT proposal, but
Right.
FEC is cooperating. But in that study, you're referring to the, I think it's the SFECC study, I think there's a ton of acronyms, but that's the study that's
To
going on
use the
right now.
rail line that is now the
It's
freight
not to
line.
use it solely for passenger, they're preserving capacity for cargo.
How much capacity do we have? I mean,
There's
that
actually-
whole thing- that whole
The
thing-
actual right-of-way there for the FEC is pretty wide. The FEC has pretty significant right-of-way all the way from, down to Hialeah, all the way up to Jacksonville where it terminates. And there's enough right-of-way there to get 3, 4 lines, actual rail lines versus the one that they have right now.
And did you factor in the cost of putting in another freight line into your analysis here? Because I always thought that they were just going to use the same tracks and they were just going to share.
No,
You're
they
talking
would
about
not-
putting in a whole nother train line,
They would
another
not
set
be
of
able-
tracks?
They would not be able to use the same tracks, and that's part of the analysis that DOT is doing.
Okay, that is just one example of
Mhm.
the complication of what happens when you get out of the port and trying to, to make the port work with what's going on around it. The other issue, of course, is the fact that a lot of things are happening around the port. You mentioned, and we've talked about this, all the things that are going on the beach. There's going to be a new Hall of Fame water park on the beach. Someday there's going to be a convention center hotel. There's already massive over-congestion on 17th Street and Federal Highway. At some point, we're all going to start choking each other. At some point, there's just not going to be enough capacity in the bigger systems to accommodate all this growth. And is anybody doing a comprehensive look at how all of these pieces impact the roadway, and each one of them just can't grow to its maximum potential being planned by individual people? Somebody's got to take a look at the bigger picture.
Right, and we work closely with the Department of Transportation, and I know we talked earlier about the bypass road, and the bypass road, despite, what happened recently at the city of Fort Lauderdale, that's still in our plan. We still are committed to build that project if that's the decision of the City Commission of Fort Lauderdale and the Broward County Commission, our bosses. It's in the plan, we've got the money in place to fund that project. I think that would improve, some of the concerns that you have, at least at the intersection of 17th Street and US 1. Part of, what Arlene did on my staff, she was actually responsible for helping to secure about $11 million from the DOT to actually help pay for that project.
And that's the $11 million they want to take away and use it someplace else.
No, they
Some
would be,
part of it.
they would be taking away the convention center share of the project, which is about $10 million. It's really $10 million from us, $10 million from the convention center, $10 million from the Florida Department of Transportation. What the city of Fort Lauderdale is talking about is using the TDC funds, the tourism development tax funds that the convention center generates, and using that portion for maybe another project they feel is more important than the city.
Would that kill the project?
Yeah, it would.
Okay.
That's a decision that the city commission needs to make. But we're committed to move forward with that project if they want us to move forward with that project.
But your board member Commissioner Rockstrom is the one who's proposing to take.
That's correct,
Well,
and it's something that our board would have to have a look at in terms of phase two. As I said, phase one's a go, it's already in design, it's gonna be constructed. Our board would certainly have another bite at the apple when the procurement process starts for the phase two portion of that project. Yes?
Does the port have its own disaster plan? And I'm talking about potential
Yes.
hurricanes, etc. And how are you accounting for different scenarios in your financial planning and your projections?
In our plan, one of the things that we looked at in this go around was climate change and how climate change could affect the facility. And we work closely with, the county's environmental division, who has done some analysis on potential increase in water levels. And what's interesting is that the increases, at least over the 20-year period, aren't that significant in terms of the facility. It really impacts the low-lying areas that surround the port, the mangrove areas. It doesn't start to affect our drainage systems, which would probably be the next thing that would start to affect. But as we get further down the line in terms of planning, we're going to start taking a much more detailed look at that over the next 5 or 10 years, because at some point it could potentially have an impact on the facility. And yes, we do have a disaster mitigation plan that's coordinated through Broward County, and and it covers all the business sectors within the port.
I want to thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting seeing the more financial side of planning that we aren't necessarily exposed to as frequently as we should be, probably. I was a little bit curious about a project that you mentioned very briefly, but was the basis of a class that we took last summer. And it was about the proposal of putting in an intermodal center somewhere between the airport and the port itself. And I think it's somewhat conceptual at that point, but I guess was something that was envisioned in some plan or another. And I was just curious if you are, first of all, familiar with that, and if you could talk about it a little bit, because that is still.
Not only am I familiar with it, I was the project manager who actually took that project through the federal process to get, the environmental assessment and the finding of significant impact. That project came to conclusion about a year and a half ago. It was about a 4-year long project, and it looked at connecting the two facilities via an automated people mover system that was elevated. A component of that was an intermodal center in the donut between the two facilities. Very capital cost intensive, that project. In order to construct that project would be about $1.5 billion. This plan that you see in front of you today, and the plan previous to that, to 2006, we've made sure that the improvements that we're planning can accommodate that system. We preserve the right-of-way within the facility. The aviation department has done the same thing. It's just a matter of how do you fund that project. And logic would tell you that, like a lot of the other projects that we've started recently implementing in the port, would be to do that through a public-private partnership. And that's something that we still continue to look at. So that project's there. Actually, we did not actually receive the finding of no significant impact for that project. We got it to about a 95% level, but in order to receive the finding of no significant impact, we actually have to have a financing plan in place for the project, which we don't have right now, but we do have an agreement with FHWA, who's the lead federal agency on the project, that project will be able to continue to stay alive with just a little bit of refresher work if anything major within the study area changes over the next 5 years. And we will be able to keep that project active and allow us to continue to pursue a public-private partnership with that project.
Questions? Yes. First, talk about that question. Why is it so expensive to build that lane over $1 billion?
It's actually with the intermodal center itself. It's about $1.5 billion. The intermodal center itself was about $400 million. So it was a rather large facility. And the reason why it's so expensive is it's an elevated system and it's a lengthy system. It's about a 5-mile system that would have many station locations. And that was the cost estimate actually in the year of expenditure, which was estimated during the study to be, I want to say, year of expenditure was like 20. Maybe you know off the top of your head, Arlene, I don't remember, but I think year of expenditure dollars was like 20.
Which project?
2017, 2018. For the people mover study, I'm trying to remember, I know that the figure I'm using, the 1.45 billion, but that was year of expenditure, that wasn't
Correct.
present dollars. So
Correct.
that was, I think it was like 2018, 2019.
And are there any environmental impacts of the dredging report?
Yeah, absolutely are.
Can you comment on those?
And that's part of what the Army Corps of Engineers is looking at. There are environmental impacts. There's a hard bottom out there where the current outrageous channel is. They've done significant, reef and hard bottom surveys out there. There's no live reef per se in the area where they would actually be dredging, but there is around it. They're proposing, in their plan, they're going to be proposing mitigation for those impacts. Also, there's going to be some minor seagrass impacts with the dredging program, more so for the widening portion of the channel versus the actual existing channel itself. But there's also plans in place to mitigate the impacts for that. So the answer to your question is, yeah, there's certainly environmental impacts and they'll be mitigated.
I think you mentioned for the Terminal 18 expansion that it was completed under budget and in less time that was originally projected. What factors do you think contributed to that?
I think number one, it had to do with project delivery. I mean, there's different ways that you can deliver a construction project. You can do traditional design bid build, which takes a significant amount of time because you're designing it, and you're bidding it, and you're building it. A lot of times it can lead to a lot of change orders in that process. You can also do design build, which saves some time because you're cutting out part of the process there. The way we implemented this project was through something called CM at Risk. It's Construction Manager at Risk. And you have a design team and a contractor that are working together as the project's being designed. And what happens is once those design plans get to a certain percentage complete, typically it's around 80 to 90% complete, the contractor gives you what's called a guaranteed maximum price. So they're saying, based on this project today at 90% complete design, I'm telling you, and we're going to sign on the dotted line, that this project isn't going to cost you any more than this amount of money. And, given the fact that, it was a significant agreement with Rural Caribbean, we were able to get a lot of cooperation from the cities. Everyone kind of saw the huge economic benefit that was going to have. So I think that contributed to part of the reason that we were able to get it done quicker. But that delivery method especially is part of the reason, and I'm a big fan of that delivery method. When you have a designer and a contractor working together, it really eliminates change orders. And change orders, not only do they add dollars, but they add a lot of time to projects. That project's very interesting. It's one of the things that we're really focused on at Port Everglades now. Is that was actually the first project, and that was one of the big recommendations in the 2007 plan that was implemented through a public-private partnership. The Port, Broward County, didn't pay for a majority of that cruise terminal. That was a $75 million terminal. Royal Caribbean paid for about $68 million of that terminal. They're paying us back over about a 6-year period with interest on that project. So Broward County put the money up front, but they're paying us back. And they get preferential use of the terminal because of that agreement. But they don't have sole use of that terminal. That terminal is used by other companies.
As far as governmental support, how you see the government, the different layers of government support in the project. Now, I know this project is going to come out eventually to the public eye. So what is that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, what I'm trying to say is, are you getting support from the different layers of government, local and federal?
For the majority, yeah. For the majority part, I would say, yeah, we are. I can't say it's 100% across the board, but I mean, there's a lot of plans, there's a lot of projects in that plan. And to say that a governmental agency or an environmental group or a community group is going to support every single project in there, I don't think I can say that. But I think everyone understands, and I think ports in general have been doing a lot better job over the last 5 or 10 years of educating the public on the importance of ports. I mean, it's a huge economic engine. We're about creating jobs. That's what we do. We are an economic development entity. that's what we did.
Comment a little bit on what is the economic impact of the cruise industry? It's all about cargo.
Well, actually, if you give me a second, I can break down that. Because I gave you like the overall impact, but I think I haven't actually broken it down by cruise and cargo. All right, so, for example, the total value of economic activity was $14 billion. Right. The cargo side is about $12.5 billion. The cruise side is about $1.3 billion. And, this report's available online. If you go to our website, the report's online. Actually, I have Arlene right now. I have her in charge of actually updating this for fiscal year 10, and we actually just received the draft report for FY 10. We're reviewing it now, and it'll probably be out within like the next month or so.
One question on your three buoy stool there, with one buoy being the community.
Yeah.
I noticed on your outreach, a lot of stakeholder people. Who's in this focus group that you?
That focus group is actually the port director's focus group. And that focus group was key individuals within the port community that he selected to bounce ideas off of as we were going through the planning process.
So it wasn't really a community.
Not the focus group. The community input came through other outreach methods, the stakeholder meetings that we held at the terminals, the meeting that we held at the library. I think we had, I want to say, with the charrettes, probably 7 or 8 of those types of meetings.
I just want to point out real quickly too, just as FYI, the 11 million that was secured for the bypass road is really from TRIP, which is the Transportation Regional Incentive Program funding, which is a federal program. So it can only be used for designated regional transportation facility, highway, roadway, that's designated as a regional facility. And the port is a part of the state transportation system. So that money can't be used for anything else other than regional transportation facility. Just FYI.
And you lose it if you don't do that project.
That's
Or
correct.
you use it
Correct.
for something else.
Correct.
If we didn't implement phase 2, that would go back into the pool, and another applicant for TRIP would probably end up with that money, with those funds.
Question about this 3 ports within a 90-mile radius or so, between West Palm Beach, or Everglades.
Well, Palm Beach isn't that big.
Okay, so but you get 2 major ports.
Yeah, you do.
Within
Yeah.
40 miles of one another.
That's correct.
And so are you guys essentially in direct competition with one another?
It's friendly competition. Yes. My director and Bill Johnson have known each other for a while. And it's interesting because actually all 14 deep water ports in the state of Florida belong to a group called the Florida Ports Council. That council was created by statute, I want to say back in the late 1980s. And that's a forum for the ports to actually get together and really cooperate and plan strategically together for the state. So, yeah, it's friendly competition. Do they steal business from us? Yeah. Do we steal business from them? Yeah. But, with the increase in population, there's enough business for both of those ports to operate that close proximity to each other. I mean, it's 40 miles, 30 miles is really, they're not right next to each other. You go to LA Long Beach, there are 2 huge ports that touch each other. You've got the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach that are right next to each other.
How is the port trying to stay competitive with other ports further north? A little more closer to the rest of the country, like Port of Jacksonville or Charleston.
That's a great point, and really, I don't look at Jacksonville as like our biggest competition. Our biggest competition is the Port of Savannah, Port of Charleston. That's who we really compete against for containerized cargo. What's interesting about Georgia and the Carolinas is that they actually have in statute state funding that's made, significant state funding that's made available to their ports, which really competitively puts Florida at a disadvantage, because I've talked about the Florida Ports Council, and there's another entity that's part of that, it's the Florida Seaport Transportation Economic Development Council. They're only allocated, that Economic Development Council is allocated $15 million a year through the Department of Transportation for all 14 ports in the state of Florida. Well, if you go back to that slide that I put up that showed the cost of these projects, that's not a lot of money for 14 ports to utilize to create jobs. When you have states like Georgia, as I said, and the Carolinas that are pumping hundreds of millions of dollars a year into their port to get them ready for the Panama Canal expansion, it's actually taking away a lot of opportunity from the state of Florida. And that's one area where I think the new administration, the governor, he seems to really understand, and he's really the first governor since I've been at the port that really has kind of grasped the concept of the ports and what a big economic engine they are. And boy, they can generate a lot of jobs, and we may be a little bit behind the curve with the expansion of the Panama Canal, whereas these Savannah and some of these other ports are in better shape than we are. So I think the state's starting to recognize the importance of the seaports a little bit more, and I know there's some legislation that's being proposed in this session that would increase funding significantly for the state seaports.
Time for one more question.
Well, I took up the whole time.
Thank you so much, David.
Okay, my pleasure.